listening to the Australian Hunting and Beyond podcast with Matt, where we talk about hunting, shooting, fishing, camping, and everything else that the great outdoors has to offer. Let's get into it. Okay, if you listen to the last podcast, you will recognise our guest tonight, Denny Ryan, chairperson of Field and Game Australia. We had to get him back on because, my God, what is going on down there? It is just blown my mind that this latest report from the committee has come back and said, let's outlaw duck hunting. Denny.
Good evening, Matt. Yes, the report, the very confused report, has come back with several recommendations, of which the first recommendation is that the Victorian government ends the annual recreational native bird hunting season opening on all public and private land from 2024. Very concerning.
You know, the last time we spoke, there was a lot of things getting Field and Game were doing, which was great stuff in research and things like that to help out with this select committee to actually have some facts and evidence behind what they were looking into. I mean, firstly, how did all that research and everything go? And how are you guys been sort of going prior to the committee's decision, and where are we at now?
Well, yeah, so look, we put in a mountain of work into this program. We pulled all the stops out. We brought in an excellent consultant who did a great deal of work for us. We went and tapped all of our members. We had a couple of working groups that supplied a lot of information. We went back and basically grabbed 65 years worth of historical information from our own organisation, bounced that around in a room and basically got that into a document that was approximately 75 pages long. We used some outside consultants to pull apart the Eastern Aerial Waterbird Survey. We looked at a lot of key data that came from government departments, and we put all that in as really, really strong evidence into our submission. We've created a legacy document for our organisation as it currently stands, and we've also learnt a lot more about some specifics of the Eastern Aerial Waterbird Survey that we had perhaps not tapped into as much as we could have in the past, but we certainly have a very good appreciation of it now. Post putting in the report and going into the hearing process, we were very open and we were very not so much excited, but we were very confident that we would finally get an opportunity to be in an open forum with a committee that would accept and work with evidence. In some discussions that we had with several members of the committee, including the chair of that committee, he had indicated that he was going to base the committee's report and a lot of the committee stuff around factual evidence, not hearsay, not pie in the sky numbers and wild claims. He was actually going to focus in on evidence that was backed up and documentation or arguments that were backed up by actual evidence. So we went into that process with a very open mind, and we went in and we represented our organisation really well, as did other sister organisations, hunting organisations, along with many private individuals who did a fantastic job. The overall submission process obviously completed as well prior to the hearing started, and there was something like 10,403 submissions made, which broke all records for Victorian government submissions, which shows the depth of feeling out there. When I say feeling, I'll come back to that shortly, but the depth of feeling and the fact that many hunters actually got in and actually stood up and made submissions. We were also told in that process that templated submissions weren't going to be counted. So, for example, the BirdLife Australia templated submission was one where you could go on their website, put your name and address in, also not your address, put your name in, your phone number in and your postcode, and hit send, and that sent a templated submission. Now, we were told by the Secretariat, the Victorian government, the committee that looks after this, that those templated submissions wouldn't be counted. But yet, when we go through and we have a broad cross-section look at some of the submissions that were made, we see quite a number of those that were accepted. So in terms of submissions, I think we were probably just slightly on the losing side of submissions, but we didn't use any templated submissions. All the hunter submissions were genuine.
That's a real positive from my perspective, in the sense that, I have been critical that hunters are our own worst enemies, and that sometimes we won't get off our backsides and sort of fly the flag. So to hear that it was not fully dominated by the antis or the people that are against duck hunting, that is a win of sorts.
It is a win, but when you take into the fact that there's 26,000 licensed duck and quail hunters in Victoria, and we probably only had around about 5,000 submissions, there's a few people that obviously didn't make the time or the effort. And also in Victoria, we have, I think it's roughly 225,000 licensed firearm owners. So we're not just talking to I know in the discussion that we had in my first podcast, we were talking about trying to unite all hunters and firearm owners, whether you're a pistol shooter, whether you're a duck hunter, whether you're a clay target shooter, whether you're a rifle shooter. This result from this committee will have far-reaching effects for all hunting and all firearm ownership and all firearm sports in Victoria. The Animal Justice Party representative that sat on this committee and the Green that sat on this committee, and you've got to go and dig into the detail of the report, but there was an amendment that was put up that if hunters no longer require shotguns for shooting duck and quail, that they should have those firearms not so much removed, but that there would be no requirement for those people to own those firearms. So that's starting to move into very, very dangerous ground in terms of firearm ownership for not only duck and quail hunters, but for everyone.
Okay, two things on that is that, yeah, you're right, 20% of duck and quail hunters making a submission is pretty poor. When you put it in terms of those figures, yeah, not great. Since the last podcast, or when we spoke, we have since had AJP, I think it was Georgie Purcell, target bow hunting in Victoria as well. And we sort of said that this is a catalyst. This is, they're paving the way to try and push a directive where hunting is gone altogether. And they're chipping away at it, which seems to be going in their favour at this stage. And it actually scares the living hell out of me if that they want to say, hey, you haven't got a genuine reason for this shotgun now because duck and quail hunting is banned. That is very scary territory that we're starting to move towards.
Absolutely, and it's not just duck and quail hunting and bow hunting. We had a reference made to deer as pest animals, and that's actually now on Hansard. That was from Michael Galea, who was the vice chair of this committee. So he said on the floor of Parliament last Thursday that he hoped that duck and quail hunters, once duck and quail hunting was banned, would move over to hunting pest animals like foxes, deer, rabbits, and hares. So that does not bode well for deer hunting and the game status of deer. The fact that the Animal Justice Party has already started on fishing. The next one is greyhound racing. They're having a big tilt at greyhound racing at the moment. Horse racing will be next. Then there will be the abattoir industry is going to come under increasing focus. Georgie Purcell is the chairperson of a committee to investigate pig gassing in the abattoir industry that handles pigs in Victoria. So that will have flow-on effects not only for Victoria but all across Australia, as will the effect of recreational hunting of ducks and quail in Victoria will have flow-on effects for how that's managed in other states as well.
I've been very vocal about multiple things you just mentioned, including we spoke previously about the National Feral Deer Action Plan that was in draft when we first spoke, and now the plan, I guess it's all been smoke and mirrors, and the submissions didn't really mean much, and the plan's come out, and it's a real big push. Now, it does make me concerned when we've got hunters ourselves out there looking at this going, oh, they're not saying they want to use poison. They're just saying that they want to get it approved. And it's like, well, hold on, wake up. Why do you want to approve a poison if you're not going to use it? Like, the end goal here is very, very clear. And I think if that's the attitude, it's dangerous. You're moving towards outlawing hunting or making it so that I wouldn't eat tainted meat. If they're dropping 1080, I don't want to eat any deer around that area. And then all of a sudden, there goes the game restrictions, it turns into that open-ended, oh, they're feral pests and let's just slaughter them or poison them, which is far more cost-effective, and it's going to be what they're going to be pushing for. All these things, I've said it before, our opposition are playing chess and we're playing checkers sometimes. And it's not necessarily from our governing bodies or our organisations. I do feel it's also from the hunting community that are not as aware or not really that concerned because they might not think it's going to impact them. And when you're talking about how many people hunt down there, especially deer, I wonder how many people got involved to help out duck hunters in this situation. I'm going to say it's very minimal because it's not in their wheelhouse, so that they're not concerned. And that is frightening, and it's something I keep calling on all hunters, saying we've got to band together and we've got to do something as a collective. The union thing down there is looking promising. I like that because it's showing that we do have the potential to be a voice to be heard and reckoned with, as opposed to all these committees and inquiries and plans that just seem to be doing backdoor sort of work, not using evidence and just pushing an agenda that's very, very clear for the majority of people to see.
Correct. So you hit on a couple of really, really good points there. Number one, I guess, if you're a skeptic, is that no government puts a committee in place to do an inquiry unless they already have a predetermined outcome of that inquiry. And that's looking more and more like what this particular inquiry was in Victoria. So there was a number of deals done during the COVID period down here in Victoria during lockdowns that required some support from the Animal Justice Party upper house member at that point in time. He's no longer there. He was replaced by, he lost his seat and Ms. Purcell got in. So there's a key issue there. One of the key issues around about the quantity of hunters actually now starting to take action is everyone must realise that now is the time, and it's death by 1,000 cuts. So it's divide and conquer, the old divide and conquer theory. So we'll start with duck and quail hunting, then we'll knock off deer because we'll just call deer a pest, and then no one will really care too much because you'll still be able to go and shoot deer. But what people don't realise is the wholesale slaughter door that will open, and it's basically, as you said, it'll be choppers loaded with 1080 baits flying over the high country, poisoning all the deer, all the wild dogs, anything else that a byproduct kill off 1080. We all know about that. We've known about that for a long period of time. The government is not interested in alternative methods of control, i.e. let's declare a portion of a national park open to deer hunting and let's get in there and allow deer hunting in that area for a 4-week block in the middle of summer or late spring when no one's there, obviously after the snow's thawed, there's no snow skiing or anything like that going on. So the government's not willing to look at those sort of methods. It's easier and cheaper to fly a helicopter over and just poison everything. There's a lot of work to be done in those spaces. Our commitment, and Field and Game has been one of the key foundation members of the Outdoor Recreation Advocacy Group, which is headed up by a number of large unions, and in Victoria it's the big unions, so the big industry group unions, which work on all the big build projects. So for those of you listening all over Australia, that's our ETU, which is Electrical Trades Union. It's the CFMEU, which is the CFMEU is like a really broad-based union. The AMWU, which is the Metal Workers, Plumbers Pipe Trades Union as well. We've also now got the Transport Workers Union. There's a number of other little small unions, Energy and Mines, and a few of those guys all coming on board. And it's all around preserving and maintaining and protecting access to outdoor recreation, which is pretty broad. It includes four-wheel driving, camping, jet ski riding, diving. It's access to marine areas. It's access to high country. It's rock climbers. It's hunters. It's deer hunters. It's duck hunters. It's quail hunters. It's all the working dog groups to preserve the use of working dogs. And it's also our recreational fishing guys as well. So because once and they've already started is once hunting is under the pump, then so is sport fishing, and then after that it will be all recreational fishing, because you don't know what you're catching when you put the bait on the hook and throw it into water unless you can see through very, very clear water what fish it is that you're targeting. But that'll be next. So that's where the ORAG group's working really, really hard at the moment, and we've got we've got a couple of meetings coming up very shortly. We've had a lot of meetings consistently, and the messages from our unions in particular has been very strong. We already had some the ETU walk off a couple of jobs. We've already had some big long toolbox meetings going on down here in the state, and it's great to see the support from the unions. And I would urge anyone listening, if you're a Victorian in particular and you're a member of a union that's not one of the big build unions we've already mentioned, maybe you're in the firefighters union, maybe you're in some of the shop distributive alloys union or something like that. I would urge you to contact your local union organiser and get him to bump it up the chain and really push it, because we've got now a precedent set where we have other unions already in the fight. So for another union who maybe would like to sit on the fence, there's now an opportunity for them to stick their hand up and say, well, okay, well, if we went to our membership, there's quite a number of our members that want to get involved in this. So, maybe we might throw our hat in the ring as well. So hopefully that sort of pressure will continue to build as well.
You mentioned their outdoor advocacy group, was it called?
Outdoor Recreation Advocacy Group, yeah, okay. ORAG.
I love it because it's something I've called for a long time and said we need to unite, not just hunters, fishers, anyone that likes camping and four-wheel driving. That is the way forward, because the sheer numbers involved in all of those things really will help everybody and not just one. So it's really pleasing to see there's some work getting done there and people rallying together. I had Tegan Carreri-Wilson on the podcast, who was running down in SSAA with a shooters action group. And they're all mad hunters trying to take back some power in the SSAA, which hopefully, I know that ended this last month, and we're recording this only a couple of days into September. So I'm hoping something like that happens and a bit of change as well, because we know how much power and money the SSAA have, and getting them to really start advocating and fighting for hunting as well. There's all these little steps that we need to start doing. And I echo the sentiment and what you're saying there, and saying to all our hunters out there, time to stand up. If you are a part of a union, if you're, whichever one it is that aren't maybe involved, start making some noise and saying, hey, I'm one of your members. This is something I love to do. There's other people doing it. Let's try and get the ball rolling with more, because it's scary in one sense for me, because I look at up here in New South Wales, the DPI come out and show how much hunting makes, and hunting and fishing combined actually is the largest primary industry, I guess, money coming in to the government. If they're still looking at preventing or limiting with the amount of money that we are contributing to the economy, then they obviously don't care about that. So we need to start looking at something else, because I know a lot of people sit there and go, oh, we make so much money for them that we're safe. And that obviously, for me, I think it's very obvious that's not the case at all, because of what we are literally seeing going on down there in Vic.
Exactly, and that's one of the key things that we've been doing a lot of background stuff on with ORAG Group, because we're at the point now where we've got all of the community organisations on that we need, and now is some time to consolidate some of that information, and then it's also time that we're now starting to broaden our horizons and look at industry. So, for example, if we look at the firearm industry, and I happen to have a conversation with James Walsh from CIFA today, and James and I had a good conversation, and we were talking about some of the things that CIFA can bring to the table. Then we started looking and thinking about, and we've been doing this at ORAG, we started looking at vehicle manufacturers. So, by far and away, anyone that goes four-wheel driving out in the bush, camping, shooting, hunting, you're probably driving a Toyota Hilux, a Ford Ranger, or a Land Cruiser, or a Prado, those type of things. So all of a sudden, those industries come into play as well. Also, the recreational fishing industry, which has got to be worth 3 to 4 times what the hunting industry is. Then all of a sudden you start looking at caravans, camping. There's tentacles that spread far and wide everywhere. So then we start talking about gross domestic product by state. So we start looking at, where people spend their recreational money and how much money that comes to and where it gets spent. And all of a sudden we're talking about, it's basically a runaway train once we get to that point. But we've just got to put all those pieces together and start to gather all that stuff up and talk about, full-time equivalent employment and things like that. And, that's probably the next step for the ORAG group, when we start to put together some real solid information around those sort of things. And you're right, and it's really knocking on a politician's door and actually making them aware of some of those things. So, and then there's also the nuances that are in some of these findings, and we're dealing with, and what everyone tends to forget as a hunter is that we're talking to people that have no idea what we're talking about. Like, we even got to the stage, the last day of hearings, and a committee member asked the question of the Victorian police officers that were there representing Licensing and Regulation Division, what categories of firearms can people use to shoot ducks? And then the question was a little bit ambiguous, so the police officer asked for more clarification, and the panel member then asked the question, can you use Category H handguns to shoot ducks? Which is, looking at the expression on your face, was pretty much what the expression on my face was. That was mind-boggling, given that we're at about day 43 out of 45 of hearings, and we had a panel member asking a question about, can you shoot ducks with a handgun? It was just stunning. So sometimes we forget as shooters, because we're well versed with what we do, just like a fisherman is well versed with what they do. But sometimes we deal with lay people and politicians that have absolutely no idea, and that's just one example. So that's what is quite interesting about this report, because there's multiple things and recommendations in this report that disagree with some of their findings, and certainly disagree with some of the things that they're actually talking about and conflicting evidence that's in this document. So, and I'll give you a really good example. So the recommendation around Indigenous hunting is a particularly interesting one. So it's a recommendation 3, that traditional owner hunting rights are retained under the existing legislation. So everyone else gets a ban for duck hunting for on private and public land, duck and quail from 2024, but traditional hunting rights are retained. Then you go along and you have a look at one of their findings, which was finding 13. There is conflicting and incomplete evidence on the wounding rate. A wounding rate at the lowest end of the range, 6%, would have resulted in the wounding of 15,700 ducks during the 2022 season. Then finding 14 goes on to say thousands of ducks would be wounded each year in Victoria. The committee considers this ongoing level of wounding to be an unacceptable animal welfare outcome. So you can't have finding 14 say that, then say, but we're going to retain hunting for traditional owners, because the two don't go together. So you either have hunting for everyone, not just traditional owners, or you have it for no one, because you've made the statement and you're finding that wounding is an unacceptable animal welfare outcome. So irrespective of the fact that there is absolutely zero evidence on any number for wounding. But anyway, I digress.
Oh, I'm Aboriginal, so for me, I look at that and go,
so
okay.
There's a lot of people woke up last Friday that had suddenly claimed some Indigenous culture and heritage.
I sit there and go, okay, when they're talking about traditional hunting, are we talking traditional hunting methods now? Am I using a boomerang, or am I allowed to use a gun? Like, are we? This is where it gets really confusing as someone that, look, being that I'm not down in Vic, I haven't been able to follow it as much as I'd probably like, but I'm super confused about a lot of these things. And when we're talking about animal welfare, I have been chatting to someone over in SA, and they're using shotguns to shoot bloody deer from helicopters and things like that. And you're looking at just the wounds on the animals, and they're complaining that that's, they're saying there's no issue with that, from the government perspective. And then we're saying, but there's an issue with a duck. And like, it's just so contradicting.
Yeah, that's a really good one. We referenced that report in our submission, and we brought that up in some of the hearing questions, because we knew wounding was the big elephant in the room in terms of addressing all of the terms of reference. We nailed every single term of reference, and the only ambiguous one was wounding, because there is no set data on wounding. There's been some studies done in the 70s. There's been some studies done that replicate that Styler study just recently, where we found 3.2% of the birds that they scanned had pellets retained in them, yet the birds had recovered and they were leading quite happy lives, being ducks, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the GMA down here argued about how many birds had died from being wounded, in between being wounded and or making it to the end where they got scanned. And that's an ambiguous study, and it's almost impossible to come up unless you devote a lot of time, effort, and money to actually doing a proper study into it. The mere fact that some of the anti-groups grabbed a hold of, a number anywhere between 6 and 40% is quite telling. And I actually brought that up in my evidence when we were doing the hearing, and I said it was a question directly from the Green on the panel, and she asked the question about wounding, and I said to her, well, quite simply, we have dedicated animal rescue groups and anti-hunting groups that run around all during duck season down here in Victoria trying to rescue wounded birds. Not even in their best year have they recovered 100 wounded birds, yet they're banding around figures of 105,000 wounded birds in a year. On a super year like 2011, where we shot 600,000 birds, if the wounding rate was 40%, it's pretty easy to do the maths on that. It would have been 240,000 wounded birds, and it's just simply not true. There's just simply not that quantity of wounded birds out there, and our shooters are much more proficient and better than that. Now, in terms of the deer report in terms of using shotgun and wounding and animal welfare outcomes as they found in South Australia was very, very interesting, because they found that by using the shotguns, that was basically anchoring the deer, and then they could have a follow-up shot with the shotgun again and or a rifle. And they were talking about animal welfare in terms of the quantity of time it took to locate, shoot, and then have a final result on that animal. So, because sometimes, obviously, the aerial shooting, sometimes there's, obviously you may miss it, not hit a vital with a rifle, and, obviously then you have to hover and stop and shoot, and then the other deer keep running away, so that puts them under further stress while you're chasing them and so on and so forth. So, so that was a really interesting report. And given that the RSPCA, particularly here in Victoria, jump up and down about wounding outcomes with shotguns, it was quite interesting to see the look on their CEO's face when we rolled out the report from the South Australian government that said shotguns are the preferred method now to shoot deer while aerial shooting. Quite funny.
Yeah, that's insane. With the report, this is where it gets really interesting, and I'm just going off the DPI sort of primary industries sort of report and how much money is made. It is a survey, and my concern with that is exactly what you said about the submissions with duck hunters being, at 20%. How accurate are some of the data that is being portrayed and used as evidence in these things? Because if you're asking, okay, the wounding rate, as you just mentioned, there hasn't been any real research done. It's hearsay. It's, these people are saying 105, as you said, at 40%, 240,000 wounded birds. Geez, that's a lot of birds. You would see that all over the papers if that was the case. And you'd have those groups out there on the water who are desperately trying to get evidence or shut it down. It would be everywhere. So I'm pretty confident you can sit there and say that's not accurate. But this is where's the data coming from? Is it just a generic survey that you can or can't do? And that then impacts numbers too. And I know data, I say this all the time, data can really be manipulated to say what you want it to say. And I do feel that happens a lot. As you just said, the large, I guess, disparity in the percentages of wounded animals. That's, if you've got any data, it should be a figure, not a broad sweeping percentage or two percentages.
Exactly. And look, there's been plenty of opportunity for particularly the Game Management Authority to do some very comprehensive study, to go and sit at wetlands and record, observe, and get some finite data. But instead, it's far easier to look at what other countries have done and then use some of their key findings and key data. Some of the data that's been used in Australia related back to a program, the original Train the Trainer for Concept, which was a shooting program we adopted from North America, where we sent some people off to do a course with Tom Roster, who was the only ballistician who had data and was selling his data per se around some of that sort of hunting ballistics for shotguns. And people went off and did that course, and they took some, unbeknownst to the participants, they took some initial data on day one on shooting walked up partridge and things like that. Then they did the course, and then they went and repeated that same exercise, and then they presented the data to the participants and said, oh, well, your first day wounding rate was this, and your final day's wounding rate was this. However, they included wounded birds retrieved by dogs. They counted those birds as wounded, right? Because they weren't killed dead in the air. So when you do that, and then you compare, so for me, a wounded bird that's retrieved by your dog is not a wounded bird because it's brought back to your hand and you've dispatched it. So that's a dead bird for mine. So some of that data, when you look at it that way, and then you have a look at the final. Now, admittedly, they did the same thing in the final test, but they found that the actual evidences of wounding reduced by approximately 15 to 20% based on better knowledge. And I think for mine, I would say that when you got to the last day of the test, you're trying to put into practice all of the things that you've learnt about ballistics, but you're also going to make sure that you do the one thing that all hunters do in the field when faced with this challenge is either take the shot or don't take the shot. So that's the key thing. So I think that, given, people get excited, they're away on a course with a whole bunch of guys and they're put in a paddock and they're shooting, I think it probably is not really reflective of a proper hunting scenario. But obviously on the last day, I think everyone's probably playing a little bit more to what they've learnt. So that's part of a process, and that's what you go through as a beginner hunter, a better hunter, and then a very proficient hunter. And even myself as a young bloke with a 5-shot semi-automatic standing in a duck swamp, I used to shoot quite a few birds. But nowadays that I'm a little bit older, I probably take my time, and there's a lot more birds that I don't shoot at rather than the ones that I do shoot at these days. And that's because I'm pretty choosy and picky about what I'm shooting, the distances that I'm shooting it in, and we put into practice all of those key things about that we do with it to for good hunting practice. It's no different to hunting deer. So, if you're out and if you've got a skill and capability with your rifle and your gear and you know exactly what you're doing. I know we've got some people out there shooting deer at some extended ranges at the moment, and then we've got guys that can shoot deer at 50 metres. So it's really about your skill level, and it's really about putting into practice good hunting practice. So that's the key thing with wounding. Now, interestingly, in Victoria, the Game Management Authority had the Wounding Reduction Action Plan, and it was put together by key organisations and participants, including RSPCA, who sat on that panel. And they presented the Wounding Reduction Action Plan for duck to the minister back in, just trying to get my dates right now, I think it was quite some time ago, and basically that report, I think it was September last year, and that report is still sitting on that same minister's desk. It hasn't been forwarded on, and nothing's been actioned from that report. And in that Wounding Reduction Action Plan, there was quite a detailed series of things to put in place to help reduce wounding. So would it get wounding under 5%? Quite possibly. Would it certainly get it under 10% if everyone did their part and did the things that they needed to do in terms of putting into practice good hunting practice? Then probably yes as well. So what do I think the wounding rate is? I think it's certainly less than 15 to 12% now. I think it's less than that. And I think with a lot of change, I think we'd certainly get down into the 5s and maybe perhaps less than that with good hunting practice.
I look at it and go, the AJP send out their messages, and I've seen the kangaroos that have been shot by arrows, and yet they're field tips. And you sit there and go, okay, no hunter is shooting. A, they're not shooting a kangaroo anyway because you can't. But B, they're not shooting it with a field tip either. So it's obviously people that actually have no idea, or it's kids, again, being young and dumb and making some mistakes. And we've all been young and we've all done things that we probably, look back now as we've matured and go, oh, that was really dumb. Shouldn't have done that. But that's what's being used and bandied around. And I think, as you said, Miss Purcell before, I saw a speech of hers the other day talking about kangaroos and trying to stop that trade and whatnot. And that there was the win with Nike overseas. And I think there was another brand who had banned kangaroo leather on the back of sort of ill-informed, I guess, information coming from here and being sent their way over there. That's always going to happen. But again, I think it's really important that we talk about what you just said and saying that, hunters that are ethical and are wanting to do the right thing are the majority. And they're the hunters that are out there and we're so invested in what we do that we don't want to lose it and we don't want to do the wrong thing. You're always going to have a small percentage that do the wrong thing. So we should be hammering those people and making sure that the precedence is set, and that is a high bar of doing the right thing, which I do feel the majority really do. Where to after this inquiry?
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting that you pick on compliance, because compliance was one of the huge terms of reference in this inquiry, and we went back and there was a lot of misinformation and let's say inaccurate information peddled by all the anti-hunting groups. And then there was the actual compliance data from the Game Management Authority, which showed compliance at super high levels. The argument that was thrown back against that was that you've only got 8 field officers, and how can you possibly draw a conclusion that everyone is compliant? Well, my answer to that is very, very easy. The quantity of wetlands and checks that they did forms a baseline as a percentage, and that percentage is simply then applied to the whole total number of hunters, and that gives you some baseline compliance data. It was interesting that we saw some compliance data around protected species, yet one of the key, which was minimal, to the point where we're talking, less than 15 individual protected species shot over the last 5 years. Yet one of the key findings makes a statement around the quantity of threatened or protected birds getting killed. Now, those quantity of 15 individual birds like that get killed every day in nature. The fact that 15 birds were shot inadvertently or for whatever reason over the last 5 years, and that's just compliance data information, indicates that is not a problem. And the level of compliance in hunting is superior to many other aspects of community life. So I used in an interview the other day on the ABC, I used an example of if we went and stood on a freeway with a highway patrol officer in the afternoon and we checked 100 cars, we'd probably find that 10 to 15% of them would be speeding, albeit maybe by a small margin, maybe a handful by a large margin. But at the end of the day, if you put the radar on 100 cars, you would probably find, if the speed limit was 100, you would probably find at least 15% of them doing 105 or more. And the lady who was interviewing me on the radio cut that argument very short, because it's fact. It's fact that people in the community sometimes don't do things that they should be doing, and maybe they might fracture a law every now and then. Hunting's no different. I don't think there's people that go out there specifically to break laws in a fashion that's designed to do it that way. But that's just community, and that's just what happened.
You made a really good point there, and we talk about like wounding and we talk about animal welfare, and something that always takes me back is that I don't think any of these people have ever seen nature and a predator and how long it takes a predator to kill their prey and what that animal suffers compared to what a bullet or a shotgun, it baffles me sometimes, because I sit there and go, okay, yes, things happen. Hunting, it's not perfect all the time. And as much as we'd like it to be perfect, it can't be. That's the nature of it. But when we look at nature itself, it is most definitely not as humane as what hunting is for the prey species anyway. So I look at that and go, that argument for me as a hunter, I don't understand it. And this is where people that are not hunters or that have no ties to anyone that hunt or have explained those things, they don't understand. And you sort of said that, and a perfect example, what you said about the committee member asking on day 43, I think you said, can we use handguns to shoot ducks? That doesn't shock me. It shocks me that anyone would think that, but it doesn't shock me to show how disconnected and out of the loop they really are. And I think what a great analogy you were using with the speeding, because when you look at broader society, and I was at a wedding on the weekend and I was speaking to a police officer there. She didn't know I hunted, actually. So we were talking about firearms, and the conversation was there is, man, we have to jump through so many hoops why would I do anything that's going to jeopardize me keeping that? Because I actually had a gun safe check on the weekend. Everything came back normal. I go above and beyond to make sure that everything's great. And that's the majority of people, because we are invested in it. It is a very costly exercise that we do. And why would you be doing things to get that thrown out? And a lot of people don't understand that side of it either. And then to go back to, again, you've got to look at where the skin in the game is. And for these parties out there that are anti-hunting, if we're using their data, if we're using their numbers, well, we shouldn't be using them compared to like GMA, who are paid. They haven't got any skin in the game. They're sitting on the fence because they're just doing their job. They're the ones that we should be looking at and going, hey, what's the information coming out of them? We've got to take this over here with the anti-hunting people saying this many ducks have been wounded or whatever it might be. Are they exaggerated? Because they have a goal that they want to achieve. Are they going to really come out and, as you just said, 15 native birds or native species got injured or killed over 5 years? Are they going to say that, or are they going to over-exaggerate to try and get their point across? And I think that's where some of this report, I got that feeling coming across that was the case.
Absolutely. So you've only got to look at the bird dump that Coalition Against Duck Hunting combined with Wildlife Victoria did on the Premier's steps back on day 4 or 5 of this, day 5 of the season. They dumped 88 birds. Wildlife Victoria had supplied documentation to the Game Management Authority Victoria on 72 of those 88 birds. So basically they had an autopsy report on each one, which we've FOI'd for reasons that you'll find out in a second. Then those birds were taken away by the Game Management Authority, and then they were scanned, examined, etc. A week later. And of those 88 birds, 48 of those birds were found to have not been shot or showed no evidence of being shot, with the caveat that there were many birds that were in advanced states of decomposition. So advanced states of decomposition would indicate to any rational person that these birds have died from something else, but they've been found, but they've been included in the pile of birds being dumped as being shot, which is what Coalition Against Duck Shooting has done forever. So we are currently FOIing all of that information from Wildlife Victoria as supplied to the Game Management Authority, because we believe that there might have been some adventurous reporting take place on some of those birds that were presented. Now, the other thing that people should also remember is that these anti-hunting organisations and anti-hunting animal activists, there's big money in the game. So there is a lot of donations to be had. There is a lot of bequeathments given from people who are passing away and leave a portion of their estate to look after cats and dogs. So, RSPCA Vic gets a lot of money in bequeathments. RSPCA Vic gets a lot of government money. They get a lot of donations. They're forever running some sort of campaign, selling something so that they can make more money. Animals Australia are in the same boat. Animals Australia have a CEO who's getting paid $750,000 a year. So that money just doesn't come from nowhere. That money's raised. Then we have Wildlife Victoria in a similar situation. Like Wildlife Victoria gets $500,000 a year from the Victorian government to run their phone call system. So when you ring up at 1 o'clock in the morning because you've run over a kangaroo or something like that, they have a phone operator system so that they can send out one of their volunteers. We have all these networks of wildlife shelters that also coincidentally have web pages and great big donate now buttons whenever you go on their web page. So it's an industry. It's the animal activism industry is out there, and hunting is one of the inevitable targets. The next target is fishing, and then the next target after that is animal agriculture, because that is the mentality of these people, and that is why we all need to band together and start to put a stop to some of these things. AJP in Victoria has fishing, fireworks, and New Year's Eve should be banned because it scares cats and dogs. There's a myriad of different policies that they have: horse racing, greyhound racing, you name it, it's there. So it's quite astonishing, and they have a a Bambified view of the world, and they just are so far removed from reality. It's not funny.
It's a massive money spinner, and I remember looking into the RSPCA one and how much when you buy the little dolls or the pens or something like that to support the animals, and I remember going through the fine print, and it was, don't quote me exactly, but it was some ridiculous amount, like 80 cents in the dollar went towards the company, and that at best the actual animals might receive 20 cents out of the dollar. And it was just like, hold on, now we're talking, that's massive money here. We're talking a lot of it getting redirected. So it's not actually going towards the animals to protect them. It's a business, and it's about making money. And you're right. You said it exactly how it is. And I guess it's that virtual signaling as well that takes place out there. I see celebrities do it all the time where they're donating, or they're out there like Pamela Anderson when she runs around with the whale guys and all that, trying to promote it and push money towards it. It's a business, and it's a virtual signal as well out there to say, hey, I'm a good person, I'm doing the right thing. I think, look, for me, in talking to you tonight and hearing all these different things saying, hey, we've got these people now starting to band together, I would really love to see our shooters and hunters get in touch, not just with the unions like we talked about before, but your shooting organisations and your clubs, and saying, hey, you know what, we need to band together. We need to make sure that we are a consolidated group. Forget the politics, forget the, whose patch is what. We need to be as a collective here, because it's all under threat. And sitting there going, you know what, they can't get rid of hunting for X amount of years, or it won't impact me, or I'll be dead by the time hunting's gone, is such a short-sighted view. And we need to be, look, I want to pass this on to my kids. I want to make sure that the next generations have the opportunity, if they want to go out and partake in our pastime and harvest wild game meat, we can. It scares the crap out of me when I see this 3D printed meat grown in a bloody lab. That, I don't want to eat that crap. What do you think's going to be the next one when that gets up and running? And what are they pushing? You mentioned animal agriculture. That's going to be under threat. We should be out there banding together with farmers. We should be helping them out as best we can with pests and things like that, even if it's flicking them money to access properties. I know a lot of people don't like that. They get scared of that. But, for me, I think it shows support. And it shows that we're out there and we are contributing economically. And the people that aren't, well, they're jumping up and down about animal agriculture and whatnot. That's okay. Let them do it, because they're not participating in buying the products. They're not supporting farmers. So who are the farmers going to side with? Who are all the people that benefit from produce grown or raised by farmers? That's the key. That's it's such a multifaceted thing that we need to really tap into and bring together and just galvanize the whole industries.
Yeah, absolutely. And Victoria is a really interesting case in terms of that, because only in recent history, I think it was only about probably 12, 14 months ago, Victoria introduced some farm protection legislation to stop activists accessing farms and breaching biosecurity and things like that. And they actually, drew a line in the sand and said, this is no longer acceptable. You can't go to a goat farm and pinch kids of goats that are still feeding off a mother and take them away and tell everyone you're rescuing them. You can't go and steal hens from a hen house, or pigs and piglets from pig growing stalls and things like that. But yet we don't afford the same protections to hunters and hunting, and we let animal activists run riot in that. It'll be interesting to see what happens in this spring racing carnival, and some of the racing institutions, Greyhound Racing Vic and the Victorian Racing Commission, we've extended an invitation to, and along the lines of what we've just been talking about, we've got some invitations out there, and there will be more advanced participation, perhaps for some of the target shooting-oriented organisations to come to a meeting. So, for example, the Victorian Rifle Association, the VAPA, the Victorian Pistol Association, we're going to get those guys, and we're all going to have a big meeting, and that'll be combined with SSAA Victoria and Fielding Game Australia, and we'll hopefully get everyone in the room and hopefully we'll just get some terms of reference, because it hasn't been done for a number of years. There's not been any specific threat probably nearly 15 odd years, 20 odd years. And I had a conversation with someone about that earlier today, where we grew the Combined Firearms Council of Victoria from in the early 2000s, and with that particular organisation was really good and really timely, and it's sort of probably just got a little bit long in the tooth, and we probably need to revitalise that. We've seen other organisations, and I think spoke about it in the last podcast, we've seen little groups popping up here and there that are very pro a particular interest, and I'm not going to pick one out as per se at the moment, but there's lots of little groups that have got little interest, but maybe not seeing the big picture. So I think we've got to start to look big picture again, and I know I referred to it in the last podcast as well, where we probably got to get all the groups together and galvanise together and be united and say, hey, and we've really got to adapt the unions. Like, really, at the end of the day, all of our shooting and hunting organisations are unions for shooters and hunters. So we've got to adapt some of that same methodology and support for each other, because quite often it's not there. So we do need to adapt that and make sure that we're all looking after each other. So that's one of my key programs for the next probably month or so. Once we get a little bit more, a couple of more things knocked out of the way this week and next week. So light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, I think that's as a takeaway, it's not all doom and gloom. I do actually feel that when a big threat comes along, that I always talk about action and reaction, and this is the action, and hopefully shooters and hunters out there are going to react, and we get some positive change in our community to band together and step up against the common threat, because it is a common threat, and it's not going to get easier. It's going to get harder and harder as we progress. And I think that's just the way of the world at the moment. And we need to be making sure as best we can that we are out there promoting what we do in a positive manner and really standing up for our rights as well, because that's what it comes down to at the end of the day. This is something that is generational. It is something that people for as long as time has been doing in hunting. And to have that under threat really I don't understand it personally, and I never will. But there is a lot of people out there that are against it, and we need to make sure that our voices are heard and that we're coming together. Where to next? This is obviously a finding, so there hasn't been a done deal made in saying that duck hunting is banned. However, this is obviously a step towards that.
Correct. So this is one part of a process that the government will be looking at. The government in Victoria has got 6 months to address this report and its recommendations. The government is not bound to follow any of the findings or recommendation in this report if it doesn't want to. And at the end of the day, and a lot of people are probably not aware of this, but in Victoria, the Victorian Labor Party has had a motion to ban duck and quail hunting for the last 25 years, and it has just simply never chosen to enact that. And it's regularly a motion that gets thrown up from one or two key players in the Victorian Liberal Party, and that's their little thing. And they constantly, they'll throw it up every couple of years, and there'll be a little bit of a push in it. Obviously during the last term, there was one upper house Animal Justice Party member who spent a lot of his time running around trying to get support in the lower house and upper house in Victoria for his little key things that he wanted to work on, and he found some people that would listen to him within not just the Labor Party, but also the Greens as well, and maybe some of the independents. And we've seen that carry on with this term of government that's now in place now, with a different Animal Justice Party upper house member, and she's got a little bit of support here and there, and we've seen some Labor Party people be a little bit more overt with the fact that they want to ban duck hunting. I think that given the current state of play in terms of where the number split is in Labor in Victoria, given the support that we're seeing come from unique alliances such as the big build unions and the fact that the ORAG group's growing at a rapid rate, the fact that we've got a report that is so confusing that I think any politician that reads it and understands it will sit there and think, well, hang on, well, if we've got a committee that's looked at this for 3 months and we've got a minority that's actually a majority and a majority that's in the minority that has written the report, that's going to be confusing enough in itself, and that'll make people stop and pause and think, well, hang on, well, what's going on here? And I think most people will see this report for what it is. It's if you were highly sceptical, you might suggest that this report is a bit of a payback for previous political deals done, and now this is done and out of the way, everyone can move on and get on with doing what we're doing. But it is going to take some time and effort from hunters and shooters in Victoria and in the state, and also internationally as well. It will take an effort from all of us to make sure that we still continue to fight this, and that we put forward the best argument, and we make sure that our argument's heard, and we get people paying attention, which is interesting. Internationally, this is being looked at as well. We've recently had some visits from some representatives from Delta Waterfowl and Ducks Unlimited here, and they've seen the work that we're doing, and some of the work that we're doing they're actually taking back to America. So it's not just us alone in this fight in this part of the world as well. So there'll be some bigger issues at play internationally as well. So who knows what that might bring in the short term. So, but we are in a unique position, and this is just the first
It is
step.
very unique, and it's pretty crazy when you talk about just how the committee, and you talked about the minority and the majority just there, but the minority of people in the committee were supporting the report, and the majority were sort of contradicting what the actual report says, and yet that's what got produced. So, I remember we had Mark Latham on the old podcast, and I spoke to him, and he talked about the horse trading that goes on and the back deals that happen to get things over the line and the paybacks. And it does really, for me, look at that and go, well, that is exactly what he says is happening, and you can see it here in black and white in this report. So, well, mate, look, I understand how busy you are, and it's been a very busy term and and you will continue to have a busy time going forward, I think. And I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Guys, if you're listening, support Field and Game. Get down there. We need to band together and really push this. There's not much more I can say. Keep doing what you're doing, Danny, and big props to Field and Game Australia and everyone who is actioning this and standing up for hunters' rights out there. So we thank you, mate, and thanks for coming on tonight.
Excellent. Thanks for having me back on board. It's always an interesting time to sit down and chat and run through all these things. And look, I think hunters should also be confident, and I guess be proud of what you are and what we do. And I think you've sort of got to lead with that argument as well when you start talking to politicians. But there's no doubt we do need to start talking to a lot of politicians and get it done quickly. And then once we can unify, and then we can start tackling these issues as they arise state by state, and we can be a lot stronger. So very good. I look forward to giving you another update at some point in time in the future, hopefully when we're secured hunting and everything will all be well.
Mate, 100%. You've got an open offer to come on any time to keep people up to date. So, mate, really appreciate your time. Listeners, united, we stand together, and that's the way forward. So thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Bye for now. If you have a topic, guest, question, or any gear that you want to hear about on the podcast, shoot us an email, australianhuntingandbeyond@gmail.com. Alternatively, find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All the links are in the show notes. If you haven't already, make sure you give us a review and subscribe to our podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.